What is the most creepy, unexplained event that has happened in your life? I saw a guy accidentally drop 16-inch concrete drill bit from shoulder height. It never hit the ground. It's like it stopped existing on its way to the floor. No sound of it hitting the floor, nowhere to go, just gone. 3 witnesses all saw the same thing. This happened in a completely empty newly constructed building. Hallway was tiled, walls were cinder block, newly installed drop ceiling. We had to fill out a missing tool report, got written up for it, had to search the entire building top to bottom for hours. I'm a very skeptic person. I can't come up with any reasonable explanation for it. Still think about it when questions like this come up. Sometimes things can just disappear, I guess. Me, my boss and a coworker were standing at a surface table measuring something when the quarter-ton table moved about 6 inches at one corner across the concrete floor with a loud screech like someone had grabbed it and moved it out of the way. We just looked at each other like, did that just happen? My family was sitting on the back porch watching a thunderstorm. My older brother grabbed a toy gun out of my hand and said, "Watch this." He pointed the gun at a tree in the backyard and pulled the trigger. As the toy gun popped, lightning struck the tree he was aiming at and the tree fell over. He handed me the toy gun back with a smile and walked away. My parents witnessed this event as well. It was one hell of a coincidence, but damn was his smile creepy. Like he knew it was going to happen. Comforter being slowly tugged off of me from the foot of the bed. When I was about 15, I was home alone in my house at night. It was just me and my 3 dogs. My dogs were normally very lazy at night. All they would do is lay in their dog beds chilling out until bedtime. But for some reason on this night they all became very agitated at the same time. They all kept running into different rooms in my house and growled and barked at empty corners. Something that they had never done before or since. I checked the whole house and never found anything. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but that night I slept in my parents' bedroom with the door locked, a gun next to me, and all 3 dogs on the bed with me. Unexplained. When I was younger, I went to Sherwood Forest with my family. On the drive back to London, the boot of the car flew open. On the motorway, about 2 hours' drive later, we were about to turn into our road when we saw my sister's coat in the mouth of the cul-de-sac. It had a Sherwood Forest badge on it. Too long did not read. After a family holiday, my sister's coat hitchhiked for 100 miles and beat us home. Smoking a cigarette outside, as sober as a worm, I see 2 very bright glowing red balls. It looked like they were squirrels playing tag, but they were indeed bright, glowing red balls that almost looked transparent. After a good 2 minutes of watching this, the balls then shot up about 20 feet in the sky, hovered menacingly and just fell. I ran over to the house across the Saint to look in their yard and see where they went. They vanished, and that was something I'll probably never see again. Has anyone experienced this as well? We participate in Passover, and every year, without fail, our cats begin acting up and interacting with things that we can't see. It's usually a process involving staring at them, running from them, and/or hissing at them. Last year, I was curious, so I decided to try to communicate with whatever it was they were after our cats acted up. I said something that went along the lines of asking if anyone was there. My electric duster, which wasn't plugged in, turned on for slightly under a second. In addition to being plugged in, a button needs to be pressed for it to turn on. Nothing happened after that, and I can't find any logical explanation for this. That device, which I still use and have had for years, has never turned on without being plugged in. It doesn't use batteries, either. When I was 13, I had a weird flash of a nightmare while asleep. All I remembered was kneeling on asphalt and holding my hand to my mouth, in the worst pain of my life. I told my mom about the dream because it scared me so much. 2 years later, I was hit by a car while crossing the street and ended up in that exact position, kneeling on asphalt, holding my mouth while blood poured out. My head had apparently bounced off the rear view mirror, and that had knocked my 2 front teeth back into my soft palate. I didn't remember the dream, but my mom did, and it really fucked with her. I don't believe in premonitions, but I often wonder if maybe traumatic events can echo somehow through time. I was in Big Brothers Big Sisters as a kid. If you don't know what that is, it's a program where adults sign up to mentor kids one-on-one and offer them guidance. I basically hung out with this random guy named Chris for a few hours a week. One day, he told me he was going on vacation and when to expect him back. That date rolled around and I didn't hear from him, so I decided to give him a call. A voice I didn't recognize answered the phone. I asked if Chris was home. The man said that there was nobody by that name there. I double-checked that I had the right number and asked the guy if he was sure. He was like, "My wife and I have lived here for years and there has never been a Chris here," so I said sorry and hung up. I never heard from Chris again. My dad died when I was 9, 4 years ago. I've had 5 dreams since then where I've talked to him. Not like a dream where I remember going on vacation with them and weird things happen. Like dreams where we talk and it kind of feels like it's not a dream but I'm in bed and it's late and I'm not really awake and we have a conversation. My mom says they're just dreams but grandma who's always had weird stuff happen to her like that is convinced it's not. I figure it's just dreams but they really feel like I'm talking to him. First let me say I don't believe in ghosts or demons or anything like that. My wife and I had just gotten married. We lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment and I got up one night to take a leak and just had a creepy feeling while I'm standing in the bathroom. Like the hairs on my neck were standing up. Anyway, I shake it off and go back to bed. The next morning my wife tells me she had a terrible dream about a demon that was watching her. I didn't tell her about my feeling because it would have scared the shit out of her. Still weirds me out a little. I've seen so many unexplainable things over the years, I can't even list them all. I'll give you the most recent. I just bought my first home a few months back. The house was built in the 1940s. Since we've moved in, there's been some random noises we passed off as our cat, or wind, or the house settling at night. About a month after we settled in, I had a baking sheet frisbee through the house. It couldn't have fallen off the counter, it was in the sink. And to get to my sitting room, you have to come around a corner from the kitchen. The cat was on the bed with me, and yet my cookie sheet somehow ended up in the middle of the floor, in a completely different room from where it started. "God damn it, Helen," is now a commonly shouted phrase in our house. Once I threw a piece of candy at my friend's head as a joke. I wasn't as funny as I thought at the time. He spent the rest of the evening sneakily trying to get revenge. I was standing by my fridge during his first attempt. I can't remember why, but either as a joke or on a whim, I dodged backwards Matrix style right as a piece of candy smacked into the fridge in front of my face. I hadn't noticed him preparing to throw it. It was just amazing luck. I was still talking about it an hour later. I go, "Dude, that was crazy." I was just like, and then imitated the dodge just as another piece of candy comes flying at me, hitting the fridge where my face would have been a second time. I don't think he tried again. Once when I was younger, I woke up, but I couldn't sit up. Then I was sitting up in a room I was never in, with my brother sleeping on my left, and my dad sleeping on my right. Then I snapped back into my room, and I was sitting up. Small-town bonfire on a Friday night after I had got done playing football. There were probably 20 of us there. Someone started to joke about skinwalkers. Another kid didn't like it and asked him to stop. The first kid responded by shouting, "Fuck skinwalkers." Everyone got quiet and looked at him. There was a rustle in the bushes and everyone assumed it was his friend pulling a prank on us. When trees started toppling over about 200 yards away. Like something very big running into them, knocking them over. The last tree to fall barely came into the clearing and a dead fox flew into the clearing. Never drove as fast as I did that night. When I was a kid and would sleep over at my best friend's house, he and his family would always tell me how haunted their house was. I honestly didn't believe them. Well, fast forward a few years, Halloween night. Me, my buddy and 2 girls were at his house watching scary movies. All of a sudden I start hearing footsteps, like right next to me. I froze up in fear, not knowing if I should say anything. I tried to rationalize it in my brain, like maybe it's a branch hitting the house, some kids throwing rocks. No. This was fucking Boots pacing back and forth right next to me. Their dog was freaking out too, running around the kitchen where the sound was coming from. I have a big bother and we have both pretty short names, don't sound familiar though. Our names get switched up a lot, which isn't too unexplainable. But it happened more than 20 plus that people that don't know my brother call me by his name. Not too creepy, but I am not sure why. It's never another name, always my brother's. About 12 o'clock, totally dark night, I'm walking home. There's no one else on Th Street. And suddenly, infant crawl to me. He is fast crawler even. Now there's no one else, me and baby, so I have to found out baby's home. When I found out his house, there's 3, teenage parent. And they didn't know babies disappear. Horrible. I was in Colonial Williamsburg as a child with my mother and grandparents. We were walking and an older Asian man grabbed me by my coat collar and started yelling at me in a tongue. probably Korean, didn't understand and started dragging me by my coat collar away from my family. He saw my face and started apologizing profusely, running away after throwing $200 in cash at my mom and hightailing it out of there while yelling, "I'm sorry. My mistake." I.e., it was weird. I think it was a case of mistaken identity. Keep in mind, I'm a white girl with blue eyes and was blonde as a child. I don't believe in ghosts at all, however. I worked in a building with keypad-locked doors. On video, at least 5 doors violently, moderately were thrown open in the same hallway seconds apart. There are cameras on both sides and neither show anyone there, and they are in an enclosed building that wouldn't have allowed wind to blow them open, plus the keypad. I 100% cannot explain what I saw, even today, but I ended up working nights in the building, alone, without ever seeing anything weird. I did on occasion get hair standing up on my neck and feeling of being watched. My grandmother died in my hand. The small candle in the room at the window went dark, then we couldn't find a pulse anymore. When telling the worker at the retirement home, she replied, "Of course. Her spirit passed on its way through the open window." Only then I noticed the window was open in November, and that it was intentionally. I don't believe, but when I saw my dead father years later, my first look was if the window was open in the hospital, and it was. I was sleeping in my dorm room in college, 1988. I heard a voice clearly tell me to go to the roof, where we often went as kind of a macho tough guy thing. My friend Eddie was sobbing on the edge of the roof. I went swiftly over to him and caught him by the collar as he jumped. I pulled him back from thin air. He didn't weigh anything at all. I was about 16 or 17 at an airport, and a 50-year-old woman sitting across from me at the same terminal started staring at me. I moved around, I stared back and looked away. I started talking to my brother next to me, and she legitimately would not stop staring or even look away from my eyes for at least 20 minutes. It was genuinely seriously disconcerting. I felt like I had done something terribly wrong and was being judged. My family and me were in a plane accident. Long story short, a hole got blown out the side of the fuselage and we made an emergency landing in Manila. Heard a pop, bang. Air masks came down. We weren't being told anything over the announcements as we were, what felt like, nosediving. Not the best flight. But the creepy thing is that for about 2 weeks after the incident I had sleep paralysis every night. Hadn't had it before and haven't since. I'd wake up every night to see a tall gray figure stood at the end of the bed. It wouldn't move apart from to tap its wrist like it was pointing to a watch. Every night for about 2 months I would have the same dream. My grandparents were cannibals and I had to run away from them, and if they caught me I had to watch them rip and tear the meat and flesh off my bones for what felt like hours until there was nothing left, and then when I would wake up I would go to the bathroom where I would hear things that sounded like whispers and saw shadow that felt like they were moving. So when I was a kid, one night I was sleeping next to my mom. I wake up in the middle of the night and I see her lying right in front of me. But then I realized that I was sleeping on the corner of the bed and I was facing the right wall, whereas my mom was on my left. Then who the fuck was this person? And how can she be next to me on the bed if I am at the end of the bed? I look below her, and she's practically floating in the air. I quickly turned towards the other side and my mom was there. I screamed, hugged her and went to sleep. Till date, I don't know who or what that was. I lost an opal ring that my father had given me. A few years later, I'd moved to a new house in a different town. My son, who hadn't even been born yet when the ring was lost, was digging with a spoon underneath a concrete slab that served as patio. He pulled out the ring that I'd lost years before. I've never been able to figure out how the ring not only got to the new location, but also got underneath a concrete slab that had been poured long before I lost the ring. I still have the ring, and sometime during its travels the opal was cracked. Also see, glitch in the Matrix. As kids my dad used to take me and my sister, sausage hunting, not a euphemism. We'd drive to a butcher shop around 30 minutes away to buy all the meat we needed. Other than sausages, they had to be hunted. Before we set off home, we'd tie little nooses out of string and hang them out of the car window. When we arrived there would be individual sausages snared on the strings. We were only young, oblivious kids, and it probably wasn't a coincidence that it only happened when we went to the butcher's shop, but to this day I have no idea how he pulled it off. This one question from Reddit keeps getting asked. It's creeping me out and I cannot explain why. My 12-year-old self at the time went inside the house to check to make sure my mom didn't leave the curling iron on, and I heard my dog talk. Like mouth move and say, "Run okay direction, run away." And of course I ran like the wind. Ran outside yelling about the talking animal and they didn't believe it. While visiting a theme park when I was younger, I ran into a dude that looked just like me who warned me that I would lose my money today and to watch my pockets. Later that day noticed my money had fallen out of my pocket, but luckily it was on the ground nearby. What the fuck, I wouldn't have noticed if that dude's comment hadn't stuck in my mind. I was playing Fortnite a while ago with some friends and then they said they had to get off. I said I would stay on for a bit longer. I decided to do random squads to try and get a win. 3 games of not winning and I run into one of those friends. I was probably around 10 years old. My parents didn't like me to play my DS all day, so I would sneak it at night. One night, I was playing Pokémon, when all of a sudden, I heard a Mont's voice in my head and it just told me to go to sleep. I instantly turned off the game and fell asleep within seconds. I thought it was my dad, but I never heard or saw the door open and he never mentioned it to me. Creeped me out for a while. Driving with some friend when I was 16. Going down the highway, a transfer truck passed us and must have pinched a rock and it shattered the glass on the rear driver's side. We pulled over to inspect and a highway patrolman came up behind us with his light on. We explained what happened and he absolutely does not believe us. He kept asking what we were doing in the car. Were we goofing off? We all keep saying it was a truck. He starts getting frustrated and threatening us with a ticket. About that time another truck goes by and it pinches a rock and busts out one of his windows. He said he'd been a trooper for 20 years and never seen anything close to that. My dad and I found a human tooth on the floor of his car. No one in my family had lost any teeth recently. As a kid I remember one nightmare that I can't explain. One night I was about to go to sleep. My parents had already gone to sleep. I could hear them snoring because we used to leave our doors open in the house. Something started pulling my blanket off of my head. I struggled to hold onto my blanket because whatever was pulling was doing it with some force. It suddenly stopped, probably about 10 seconds of pulling. I laid there and could hear heavy breathing from somewhere. I couldn't really pinpoint where it was coming from. I still sleep with a blanket over my head even though I'm married. I'm a guy if that even matters. Not creepy, just unexplained. My dad lived on a farm called, say, Springfield Farm. I bought my first house in a town 80 miles away. The house was called Spring Cottage. Soon after moving in, a letter arrived from the livestock market. It was addressed to Mr. Red Custard at Spring Cottage. I have no idea how they managed to put my address on that. Happened to me over 30 years ago. Overslept but called in my bullshit story that I was running late due to car stalling out in front of the church, thinking the little details sell the lie. Small town, everyone knows the spot. The next day on my way to work, and on time, my car stalled in that exact same spot. Would not restart. Freaks me out so much I avoid driving by that church to this day. At my family reunion we were yelling in the woods and heard a little girl's voice reply very faintly. We later went to eat and returned with a mixture of blood and mud on the wall that said, "There is no escape." Pretty sure it was a prank, but that was like the best day of my life. Tears of joy. One morning after sleeping in for a while, I walked downstairs and my family gaped at me as though I was a ghost. Apparently just a couple minutes earlier I had silently walked past them and into the computer room as they all said good morning. If I had been sleepwalking I would have had to walk past them again to get to my bedroom, but they all swear I didn't. There was this thing when I was little, I always noticed it around my house for short periods of time. It never stayed long and I never really got to see it completely. My dad told me what it was called before it disappeared forever though. He called, "Your mother." Was in my RV camping alone and I was curled under the blanket almost to sleep. When something pulled my pillow, with my head on it, out from under the blanket. Roughly 12–15 inches. I opened my eyes and nothing was there. The RV was locked. Coworker of mine in a restaurant. He was doing prep in the morning in a completely empty building. Goes to make a poo and while in there he can clearly hear the sounds of the door just outside of the restroom that leads to our patio open and close. As no one is supposed to be in the restaurant. We are only open for dinner service. He bolts up and no one is there. So he checks the security cams. He sees himself walk into the bathroom. Then the screens go all white fuzz for a few minutes. Then the click back when he runs out. I saw the footage. That shit happened. Very eerie. When I was young, I always slept on the far side of my bed. I sometimes fell down, and it was a tall bed. A few times in the middle of the night when fell off, crying, I saw a black figure sitting on one of the dining room chairs. The chair was pulled out. I lived in a small apartment back then, so I could see the dining room from my room. In the morning the chair was always back to where it was before. I still don't know what, or who this was. It still terrifies me, and now I wish didn't write about this cause I didn't want to think about this ever again. A family friend works at a notary. He always carried around a dark black mug. One day he put it in a desk while we were on visit. They all left to get something and I stayed talking to my girlfriend on my phone, I think. The mug was on the table, the handle looking into the table. And I swear to fucking God that shit did a 180 and scraped its way to a corner. And then didn't slide off, but I swear a ghost was drinking from it. Because the mug was floating. Then it fell and shattered. I live 347 kilometers away now. Serious. We didn't move because of that, by the way. I was in a car accident and really thought after I had hit my head I thought I was going to die. I knew I was going to die. I swear to God I remember seeing wings, possible angel wings. I was pulled out of my car by a mysterious man named Tom. He had told the cops he was just a local bystander. I knew he was in the truck behind me. He stayed with me right after EMS and cops came. After I talked to police and was examined by EMTs, I turned around to talk to and thank Tom, but he was no longer there. My question is, where is Tom now? What does he do? I would love to sit down with him and just talk about it and how he saved my life. When I was a kid of about 12, I had a wart on my thumb that nothing seemed to be able to take off, even dry ice. There was an old man in the small rural community in Nova Scotia where I lived. He was the seventh son of the seventh son, and they said that he had the power to remove growths and warts and such. I went to him one day, and he rubbed my hand over and over in his a few times, and I went home. Within 2 weeks my wart dried up and disappeared. I was not the only one that this happened with. I wouldn't call this creepy, but it is unexplained. I was actually ecstatic that the wart was gone. Anyone want to take a stab at it? I remember falling asleep and waking up the week before. I repeated an entire week, and I have no idea what happened. Ever since, I've believed that we're in some form of the Matrix or something.